Hello, and welcome to another episode of History Done Right. This is, by my count, episode 30, assuming I've counted correctly. Glad you're joining me either live or watching the video. Hope you've been a part of these episodes over a number of weeks or months, whatever it's been. If not, go to the Bradford Christian College YouTube channel, click on playlist. You'll find History Done Right playlist, and you can see all the previous episodes there. I would encourage you to, if that's your situation, I would encourage you to um, especially view the first three episodes where we talk about the foundations for what it is that we mean by history done right. And we're really wanting to immerse ourselves in a proper view of history, specifically a providential view of history, a view of history that recognizes God's hand in guiding and directing things, and that acknowledges the truth of the Bible as um, uh, real history for us, and how things took place. And in acknowledging that, we come to recognize that we've been more influenced by wrong history than we maybe care to admit. And so that's uh, one of the purposes of this series. Um, Let me first mention our sponsors, Bradford Christian College. Bradford Christian College is an online college um, that is information is available at bradfordchristiancollege.com. There should be a link in the description below. Um, Go there, find out what information you can find there, contact them with questions, and get yourself signed up with Bradford Christian College. A number of bachelor degrees, also master's in theology is available. You're assigned a mentor who meets with you regularly, walks with you through your program, and makes sure that you stay on track. Challenges you with further application of what you're learning, and answers questions that you might have about um, material concepts and such. So, bradfordchristiancollege.com. Um, Go there and get yourself signed up for what is one of the, in my humble opinion, one of the best college programs available. Um, Also, let me mention Covenant Academy Online. Covenant Academy Online provides live classes for, let's say, grades 4 through 12, um, and can provide classes in the standard classes that you would expect, the English, the history, science, and math classes that you would expect. Also, provide a lot of kind of unique specialty classes that your students might be interested in. We've taught classes on just the Cold War era. We've developed a cultural history class, a little different way to look at history than is done typically through textbooks. Vietnam War, Korean War, all of those specific history events. Several times taught a forensic science course. Um, uh, Introduction to law. So those are just some of the ideas, and we'd love to work with homeschooling families. That's where we've done most of our work. We've also worked with homeschool co-ops or even church schools. Providing classes where a particular um, circumstance has arisen, where maybe there's not a teacher available for a physics class or a chemistry class or an algebra 2 or something. And so those opportunities are available as well. So you can contact me at TBarrett at covenantacademyonline.com, TBarrett at covenantacademyonline.com. Contact me there, and let's start a discussion, and we can figure out a way that we can help you with whatever your needs are regarding um, your students' education. And let me just say now, this would be a great time for you to like and subscribe. then you don't have to remember to do it later, right? Just go ahead and hit the like button while you're right there. Right next to it, there'll be the subscribe button. You can click the bell for notifications, and just take care of that um, part of your responsibility as a viewer of these videos. All right. So let's see if we can. All right. So in our timeline, we are just um, last episode we talked about the dispersion at the time of the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, 5 verses 5 through 9, and we understand it as the that point at which we are going to see the beginnings of nations. And remember, especially from Genesis 10, we understand biblically what is meant by a nation, right? And so in Genesis 10, a few times we read something like this, um, that whatever group is being talked about was divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. Okay. And so, how do we get a nation? Well, they had shared borders, divided in their lands. They had a shared language, everyone after his tongue, and they had a shared culture after their families. Okay. So, borders, language, and culture. Those are the elements that make a nation. And any nation um, should want to protect those things, their borders, their language, and their culture, right? That's critical to maintaining a nation. Okay, so as I said, we read through verse 9 here, where we find that these people at this time, instead of being obedient to God's directive, and as commentators seem to indicate, Noah's directive to them to spread out, fill, and replenish the earth. Um, they all decided, no, we don't want to be scattered like that. We want to make a name for ourselves. So we're going to build a city, and in the center of that city is going to be this tower that's going to be the center of our politics, our economics, our religion. This is it right here. And in fact, they specifically said we want to do this because we don't want to be scattered, right? If we don't do this, we will be scattered, and we don't want that. And it's always a problem when you end up committing yourself to a life that's contrary to what God's directive is for you. So uh, God then judges and scatters them, but in that judgment is great blessing, because um, it actually it actually leads to, whether willingly or not, it leads to um, people groups fulfilling the directive of God, that they would fill the earth and replenish the earth. Okay, so tonight we're going to step away from the Bible for a moment. We're going to start reading from some other sources about this period of history. And we're going to start here with Josephus in his Antiquities of the Jews. And we'll be in chapter 4 here. And in chapter 4, it says, concerning the Tower of Babylon and the confusion of tongues. Now, the sons of Noah were three: Shem and Japheth and Ham, born 100 years before the deluge, that is the flood. These first of all descended from the mountains into the plains and fixed their habitation there, and persuaded others who were greatly afraid of the lower grounds on account of the flood, and so were very loath to come down from their higher places to venture to follow their examples. Okay, so here um, Josephus seems to suggest that um, others, having heard about the flood, I guess, I mean, because it's only Noah and his family that have gone through the flood, right? But others hearing about the flood had to be persuaded, because they were greatly afraid, right? And they didn't want to go to the lower ground. Um, They wanted to stay in the higher places. Now, the plain in which they first dwelt was called Shinar. God also commanded them to send colonies abroad for the thorough peopling of the earth. Okay, so this is how Josephus um, tells about fill and replenish the earth. Okay, that they might not raise seditions among themselves, but might cultivate a great part of the earth and enjoy its fruits after a plentiful manner. But they were so ill instructed that they did not obey God. And we saw that in the Bible, for which reason they fell into calamities and were made sensible by experience of what sin they had been guilty. For when they flourished with a numerous youth, God admonished them again to send out colonies. But they, imagining that the prosperity they enjoyed was not derived from the favor of God, but supposing that their own power was the proper cause of the plentiful condition they were in, did not obey him. Okay, so this is um, this is a recurring issue in history. Right, they're imagining that the prosperity they enjoyed was not derived from the favor of God. Um, right, so it was their own power. Okay, and this points out something that is a problem for man: his insistence on autonomy. Right? That I'll provide for myself. I provide for myself. I don't need anybody else. I don't depend on anybody else. The plenty I enjoy is entirely from me. They added to this their disobedience to the divine will, the the suspicion, is that, not sure what that word is there, suspicion, that they were therefore ordered to send out separate colonies, that being divided asunder they might the more easily be oppressed. Right, so this was them, as we read in the Bible, them, we don't want to be scattered. We want to make a name for ourselves here, right? They didn't want uh, to easily be oppressed. Okay, but I take you back to the garden, and this is something that in the Friday Random Cast, where we're talking about homeschooling and identifying principles. One of the things we talked about recently was this idea that to enjoy the greatest extent of liberty means that you exercise um, proper self-government, right? And for Adam and Eve, it was governing themselves in regards to one tree, and they could enjoy the liberty of the whole garden and all of the other trees in the garden. They would be free to enjoy. And here, this idea of autonomy, that I'll be a law unto myself, and I'll do what I want to do the way I want to do it. Um, right, and they're pretending as though um, the directive of God is somehow oppressive. Okay, so Josephus here says, now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God as if it was through his means they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured their happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God but to bring them into a constant dependence upon his, that is Nimrod's, power. He also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. Okay, so um, what Josephus' source is for this, I don't know. Um, it's interesting to think about. Uh, is that possibly why? Um, that tower was being built. Um, to give them a place to ascend to that would be higher than the rising waters should there ever be a flood again. Um, so interesting, right? Now the multitude were very ready to follow the determination of Nimrod and to esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God. What an interesting follow the determination of Nimrod, esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God. See how that's all flipped? And that's the nature of paganism or sinfulness, right? That's what Romans 1 tells us. Suppressing the truth in unrighteousness, lifting up that which is unrighteous as though it were righteous. They built a tower, neither sparing any pains nor being in any degree negligent about the work. And by reason of the multitude of hands employed in it, it grew very high, sooner than anyone could expect. But the thickness of it was so great, and it was so strongly built, that thereby its great height seemed upon the view to be less than it really was. Okay, um, so Josephus is saying that it grew very high, but because it was so thick, or the width of it was such that it maybe didn't seem as high as it really was. It was built of burnt bricks, cemented together with mortar made of bitumen, that it might not be liable to admit water. When God saw that they acted so madly, he did not resolve to destroy them utterly, since they were not grown wiser by the destruction of the former sinners, but he caused a tumult among them by producing in them diverse languages, and causing that through the multitude of those languages they should not be able to understand one another. The place wherein they built the tower is now called Babylon, because of the confusion of that language which they readily understood before. For the Hebrews mean by the word Babel confusion. We see that in the Bible. The Sybil also makes mention of this tower and of the confusion of the language when she says thus: when all men were of one language, some of them built a high tower as if they would thereby ascend up to heaven. But the gods sent storms of wind and overthrew the tower and gave every one his peculiar language. And for this reason, it was that the city was called Babylon. Okay, so um, this is another source that Josephus uses. um, and it references this story, this um, um, and while it's not correct according to Scripture, it does tell the story. But as to the plain of Shinar in the country of Babylonia, um, Hestius mentions it when he says thus: such of the priests as were saved took the sacred vessels of Jupiter and Gallus and came to Shinar of Babylonia. Okay, so there Josephus is referencing other histories that mention a similar circumstance as the Bible. Continuing on with Josephus, after this they were dispersed abroad on account of their languages and went out by colonies everywhere, and each colony took possession of that land which they light upon, or where they ended up, and under which God led them. Now, some of our commentaries that we read before suggest that Noah actually announced the lands to which they were to go, and they didn't go, so that the whole continent was filled with them, both the inland and maritime countries. There were some also who passed over the sea in ships and inhabited the islands, and some of those nations do still retain the denominations which were given them by their first founders, but some have lost them also, and some have only admitted certain changes in them that they might be more intelligible to the inhabitants. And they were the Greeks who became the authors of such mutations. For when in after ages they grew potent, they claimed to themselves the glory of antiquity, giving names to the nations that founded well in Greek, that they might be better understood among themselves, and setting agreeable forms of government over them, as if they were a people derived from themselves. Right. So he's just talking about how Greek the Greeks grew to a position of prominence, and they took advantage of that position by um, naming things in accord with their language, right? Like you might expect would happen. Now, they were the grandchildren of Noah, in honor of whom names were imposed on the nations by those that first seized upon him. Japheth, the son of Noah, had 7 sons. They inhabited so that beginning at the mountains Taurus and Armanus, they proceeded along Asia as far as the river Tanais, I'm going to mispronounce these, and along Europe to Cadiz, and settling themselves on the lands they light upon, which none had inhabited before, they called the nations by their own names. For Gomer founded those whom the Greeks now call Galatians, but were then called Gomerites. Magog founded those that from him were named Magogites, but who are by the Greeks called Scythians. Now, as to Javan and Madai, the sons of Japheth, from Medea came the Medians, which are called Medes by the Greeks, but from Javan, Ionia and all the Grecians are derived. Thobal founded the Thobalites, which are now called Iberes, and the Mosocheni, who were founded by Mosoch. Now they are Cappadocians. There's also a mark of their ancient denomination still to be shown, for there is even now among them a city called Mazaka, which may inform those that are able to understand that so was the entire nation once called. Thyrus also called those whom he ruled over Thracians, but the Greeks changed the name into Thracians. And so many were the countries that had the children of Japheth for their inhabitants. Of the 3 sons of Gomer, Afkanaz founded the Afkanasians, who are now called by Greek Rhaginians. So did Riphath found the Riphians, now called Paphlagonians, and through Gama, the Thrugamians, who, as the Greeks resolved, were named Phrygians. Okay, so this is pretty interesting accounting of the nations, and Josephus seems to be giving names to the nations as the Greeks assigned those names. And so, again, this can become, if you're going through this with your children, I mean, this can become um, an exercise where you're going to take some outline map of that area and do the research and find where these nations, as named by the Greeks, were located. And you can start filling in a map and becoming more confident in where these nations are located. Of the 3 sons of Javan, also the son of Japheth, Eliza gave name to Elysians, who were his subjects. They are now the Aeolians. Tharf, Tharsus to the Tharsians, for so was Cilicia of old called. The sign of which is this, that the noblest city they have, and a metropolis also, is Tarsus, the tau being the change put for the theta. Sithimus possessed the island Scythimia, which is now called Cyprus, and from that it is that all islands and the greatest part of the sea coasts are named Scythum by the Hebrews, and one city there is in Cyprus that has been able to preserve its denomination and is called Citius by those who use the language of the Greeks, and has not by the use of that dialect escaped the name of Scythum. And so many nations have the children and grandchildren of Japheth possessed. Now, when I have premised somewhat, which perhaps the Greeks do not know, I will return and explain what I have omitted. For such names are pronounced here after the manner of the Greeks to please my readers, for our own country language does not so pronounce them. But the names in all cases are of one and the same ending. For the name we here pronounce Noeus is there Noah, and in every case retains the same termination. All right, so I think for that section, just the recognition that maybe the more common names for these nations, the Greek names that are applied, we can see their connection to the descendants of Noah through Japheth. The children of Ham possessed the land from Syria and Amanus and the mountains of Libanus, seizing upon all that was on its sea coasts as far as the ocean, and keeping it as their own. Again, this can be a great exercise. Find a map. You got the whole interwebs. Find a map and have your children find these places and label their own outline map in this way. And I think it will be really helpful for them as they continue, doing this exercise, as they continue to read this history, and they have this this geography in mind, because they took the time to do this exercise. Some indeed of its names are utterly vanished away, others of them being changed, and another sound given them are hardly to be discovered. Yet a few there are which have kept their denominations entire. For of the four sons of Ham, time has not at all hurt the name of Chus, for the Ethiopians over whom he reigned are even at this day, both by themselves and by all men in Asia, called Chusites. Okay, so this is the Ethiopians. The memory also of the Mesreites is preserved in their name, for all we who inhabit this country of Judea call Egypt Mestra, and the Egyptians Mestrians. Phut also was the founder of Libya and called the inhabitants Phutites from himself. There is also a river in the country of the Moors which bear that name, whence it is that we may see the greatest part of the Grecian historiographers mention that river and the adjoining country by the appellation of Foot. But the name it has been by change given it from one of the sons of Mestraim, who was called Libius. We will inform you presently what has been the occasion why it has been called Africa also. Canaan, the fourth son of Ham, inhabited the country now called the Judea and called it from his own name Canaan. The children of these were these: Sabas, who founded the Sabians, Evelas, who founded the Evelians, and who are called Getuli. Sabathus founded the Sabathians. They are now called by the Greeks Estabarans. Sabactus settled the Sabactans and Ragnus the Ragnians. And he had two sons, the one which Judatus settled, the Judaeans, a nation of the western Ethiopians, and left them his name, as did Sabus to the Sabians. But Nimrod, the son of Chus, or I think biblically that's Cush, stayed and tyrannized at Babylon, as we've already informed you. Now, all the children of Mizraim, being 8 in number, possessed the country from Gaza to Egypt, though it retained the name of one only, the Philistine, for the Greeks call that part of the country Palestine. As for the rest, Ludium and Enamim and Labam, who alone inhabited in Libya and called the country from himself, Nedum and the Throsim, and now I'm getting a little bit sorry. I got myself into reading this part. It wasn't the part that I had most wanted to read. But anyway, we know nothing of them besides their names. And for the Ethiopic war, which we shall describe hereafter, was the cause that those cities were overthrown. The sons of Canaan were these: Sidonius, who also built a city of the same name. It is called by the Greeks Sidon. Amathus inhabited in Amathine, which is even now called Amath by the inhabitants, although the Macedonians named it Epiphania from one of his posterity. Arudius possessed the island Aradus. Arucus possessed Arche, which is in Libanus, but for the 7 others, their names there, we have nothing in the sacred books but their names. For the Hebrews overthrew their cities, and their calamities came upon them on the occasion following. Noah, when after the deluge the earth was resettled in its former condition, set about its cultivation. And when he had planted it with vines, and when the fruit was ripe, and he had gathered the grapes in their season, and the wine was ready for use, he offered sacrifice and I'm not sure what that word is. And being drunk, he fell asleep and lay naked in an unseemly manner. When his youngest son saw this, he came laughing and showed him to his brethren, but they covered their father's nakedness. And when Noah was made sensible of what had been done, he prayed for propriety or prosperity to his other sons. But for Ham, he did not curse him by reason of his nearness in blood, but cursed his posterity. And when the rest of them escaped that curse, God inflicted it on the children of Canaan. But as to these matters, we shall speak more hereafter. Okay. So he's going to talk about Shem, the third son of Noah, 5 sons. For Elam left behind him the Elamites, the ancestors of the Persians. Asher lived at the city Nineveh and named his subjects Assyrians, who had become the most fortunate nation beyond others. Arphaxad named the Arphaxadites, who are now called Chaldeans. Aram had the Aramites, which the Greeks call Syrian. As Laud founded the Laudites, which are now called Lydians. Of the 4 sons of Aram, Uz founded Trachonitis and Damascus. This country lies between Palestine and Seleucia. Ul founded Armenia and Gather the Trians, and Messa the Messenians. It is now called Charax Spaphina. Salah was son of Arphaxad, and his son Eber, from whom they originally called the Jews Hebrews. Okay, so we get to the part that I really wanted to read from Josephus. Um, he says, "This shall suffice concerning the sons of Shem." And then he says, "I will now treat of the Hebrews. The son of Peleg, whose father was Eber, was Ragau, whose son was Serug, to whom was born Nahor. His son was Terah, who was the father of Abraham, who accordingly was the 10th from Noah, and was born in the 292nd year after the deluge. For Terah begat Abram in his 70th year. Nahor begat Haran when he was 120 years old. Nahor was born to Serug at his 132nd year. Ragau had Serug at 130. At the same age also, Peleg had Ragau. Eber begat Peleg in his 134th year, he himself being begotten by Salah when he was 130 years old, whom Arphaxad had for his son at the 135th year of his age. Arphaxad was the son of Shem and born 12 years after the deluge. Now Abram had two brethren, Nahor and Haran. Of these, Haran left a son, Lot, as also Sarai and Milcah, his daughters, and died among the Chaldeans in a city of the Chaldeans called Ur. And his monument is shown to this day. These married their nieces. Nahor married Milcah, and Abram married Sarai. Now Terah, hating Chaldea on account of his mourning for Haran, they all removed to Haran of Mesopotamia, where Terah died and was buried when he had lived to be 205 years old. For the life of man was already by degrees diminished and became shorter than before, till the birth of Moses, after whom the term of human life was 120 years. God determining it to the length that Moses happened to live. Now Nahor had 8 sons by Milcah, Uz and Buz, Kemuel, Chesed, Azah, Feldus, Jedelf, and Bethuel. These were all the genuine sons of Nahor, for Teba and Gam and Takis and Makkah were born of Rumah, his concubine. But Bethuel had a daughter, Rebekah, and a son, Laban. Okay, so here Josephus continues in particular, the line of Hebrews really up through Abram, and how we end up with Abram and Sarai. Um, so that's what we see in this section of Josephus in this history. Now, again, this section that I've highlighted here and was really the section I should have focused on and read and not everything else. But once again, it becomes a way for our children to build a chronology, see the real history that's going on. They're seeing the development of the different nations. They're getting those nations connected to a more common or contemporary nation name, as we saw in what we were reading previously. Um, Here we get geographic locations that we can make use of on a map. We're getting uh, a line. Now, I mean, you can see these on different charts and things. You can follow the lines, but it's so much more meaningful when um, children can build these out themselves from what they're reading, and not just, I mean, because you can just look at a chart and see um, the descendants and such. But it's so much more meaningful when students can actually take what they're reading and start to set forth this line, um, and you're given um, You're given the numbers here, the number of years for each circumstance, and so you can really build this out, um, and students can generate their own, and that's how they take greater possession of this material. All right. Um, we also wanted to read from this is from Jonathan Edwards' history, um, his history of redemption. We've read from this previously, and this is a section titled "The Flood to Abraham." You can kind of see with Josephus that's um, what we are advancing to following the flood and the dispersion is getting to Abram or Abraham. So here's how Jonathan Edwards deals with this: the dispersing of the nations and dividing the earth among its inhabitants immediately after God had caused the building of Babel to cease. This was done so as most to suit the great design of redemption. Okay, now, this is Edwards' purpose here, but we don't want to forget this in history. Okay, all of that history before Christ is pointing to him, right? It's God's building his history to that most important event, right? And all the history afterwards is looking back at what Christ has accomplished in this work of redemption and is witnessing how effective the work of Christ is to overcome the curse. And particularly, God therein had an eye to the future propagation of the gospel among the nations. They were so placed, their habitation so limited round about the land of Canaan as most suited that design. Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he had separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. And in Acts 17, and has made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him. Okay, so here we see reinforced one of our foundation stones of doing history right, and that is the providential view, that the forming of the nations is not happenstance, it's not by accident. Um, it was part of uh, that design, that great design of redemption. The land of Canaan was situated the most conveniently of any place in the world for the purpose of spreading revealed light among the nations in general. The Roman Empire, the chief part of the civilized world in the apostolic age, was in the countries round about Jerusalem. The devil, seeing the advantage of this situation of the nations for promoting the great work of redemption and the disadvantage of it with respect to the interests of his kingdom, afterwards led away many nations into the remotest parts of the world to get them out of the way of the gospel. Thus he led some into America and others into cold northern regions, almost inaccessible. Okay, so that's a really interesting view that Edwards is setting forth here regarding what's happening. But notice what Edwards is getting at, and something that's um, I mean, if you want to do history right, okay, it's looking at what is the real battle that's going on, right? And I mean, we understand this um, from the Bible, but do we understand this in history in general? That God is working out His plan of redemption, right? And there is, spiritually speaking, there's an enemy that comes against Him, that's trying to work against that, not successfully at all, but that's what Edwards is suggesting here. And so, if we think about it, and we think about, we end up with people groups scattered across the globe, right? Um, and it is generally the case, right? As you read through history, that the further you get away from Jerusalem, right? As our history spreads out from Jerusalem, the further you get away, the more um, unchristian the cultures become, right? Um, they've been so far removed that they're not even hearing snippets of the gospel message. They're so far removed. Okay, let's continue with Edwards here. Though God had lately wrought so wonderfully for the deliverance of his church, and by the way, Edwards has no hesitation to speak of um, the church being present in the Old Testament. For Edwards, it seems, at least in the readings that we've done in these episodes, for Edwards, it seems it's always about the church, whether he's reading Old Testament or New Testament. And had shown so great mercy towards it, as for its sake even to destroy all the rest of the world. And though he had lately renewed and established his covenant of grace with Noah and his sons, yet so prone is the corrupt heart of man to depart from God and to sink into the depths of wickedness, darkness, and delusion, that the world soon after the flood fell into gross idolatry. So that before Abraham, it was almost universal. What was almost universal? The gross idolatry. It's like um, the lesson that should have been rehearsed following the flood is forgotten. So Edwards says the earth had become very corrupt at the time of the building of Babel. Even God's people themselves, that line of which Christ was to come, were corrupted in a measure with idolatry. Joshua 24, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. The other side of the flood means beyond the river Euphrates, where the ancestors of Abraham lived. Okay, once again, a great opportunity to do some geography work, right? You're going through this with your children. Pull out the map, look at it, have them um, with an outline map where they start labeling these things. Again, that's how they take possession of this. Um, of this, we are not to understand that they were wholly drawn off to idolatry to forsake the true God. For God is said to be the God of Nahor, the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judged betwixt us. But they partook in some measure of the general and almost universal corruption of the times, as Solomon was in a measure infected with idolatrous corruption, and as the children of Israel in Egypt are said to serve other gods, though there was the true church of God among them. And as there were images kept for a considerable time in the family of Jacob, the corruption being brought from Padan Aram, whence he obtained his wives, or from where he obtained his wives. So um, it's interesting how this um, tendency to paint with a broad brush and then having to, um, express a. Now, by saying that, I don't mean everyone. I mean, like in our day and age, it's become a very important thing, it seems, that has to be said, right? Well, those people are like this. Now, that doesn't mean that each and every person's like it should be understood that, it should be understood that I'm painting with a broad brush, and this is a generality, and it doesn't apply to each and every single person. But we're so sensitive in this day and age that we have to clarify that. And it seems like Edwards was clarifying as well. All right. This was the second time that the church was almost brought to nothing. Now, what is this he's talking about? Well, he's talking about the Tower of Babel, right? What was happening at that time, and what does he call it? The church. It's always the church. The church. It's always about. All right. This was the second time that the church was almost brought to nothing by the corruption and general defection of the world from true religion. But still, the true religion was continued in the family from which Christ was to proceed, which is another instance of God's remarkably preserving his church in a time of a general deluge of wickedness, and wherein, though the God of this world raged and had almost swallowed up God's church, yet he did not suffer the gates of hell to prevail against it. Okay, you got to love how Edwards, he's, uh, he is taking what in our day would be considered only New Testament thinking, and he's saying, no, look, in the Old Testament days, it was all about preserving his church, his the bride for Christ, right? The body of Christ. It was always about that, and so that's one of the refreshing things about reading Edwards, um, for us to see. Okay, so that's all we have from Edwards at this point, and so Edwards helps us to see that this period of the Tower of Babel is a very corrupt period, not unlike, I suppose, the corruption that was there prior to the flood. And I don't know that it's right for us to say that, the corruption prior to the flood was necessarily the worst corruption that was expressed in history. I don't know. This was the time of Babylon. It's all people being disobedient to God's will, right? So, um, as Edwards points out here, this period of history, God is at work remarkably preserving his church. And he's showing, God continues to show his long suffering, his forbearance, his great patience with um, depraved mankind. Um, but now, the other thing that I would point out here is that Josephus and Edwards here and other readings that we're going to look at, um, there was a time when these would be the common history textbooks that would be read. And this is how history would be understood. And this is doing history right. Okay. Um, Pick up a contemporary history book. In fact, I would even suggest you pick up a contemporary history book that even promotes itself as being Christian, and see if this is the kind of history that you're reading. Is it unashamedly providential in its view? Now, maybe some are, and that's great. Uh, More of it, right? But is it unashamedly providential in its presentation of history? And is it, particularly as Edwards is showing here, is it really understanding um, whatever period of history we're reading about? Is it understanding it in the context, in this case, in the context of God's great design of redemption? Okay, maybe one more reading here. This is uh, Thalheimer. I'll pretend like I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But this would have been, again, this would have been at one point, a very common history text. So he talks about the sources and divisions of histories, and notice what he sets down here is that, okay, so we have written records, we have architectural monuments, and we have fragmentary remains. Okay, now, um, I guess he didn't specifically mention archaeology there, but maybe that's taken up in architectural monuments or fragmentary remains, right? Um, It says here, of these, the first alone can be considered as true sources of history, the written records. Several races of men have disappeared from the globe, leaving no records inscribed either upon stone or parchment. Their existence and character can only be inferred from fragments of their weapons, ornaments, and household utensils. So there's archaeology. Such were the lake dwellers of Switzerland and the unknown authors of the shell mounds of Denmark and India, the tumuli of Britain, and the earthworks of the Mississippi Valley. The magnificent temples and palaces of Egypt, Assyria, and India have only afforded materials of history since the patient diligence of Oriental scholars has succeeded in deciphering the inscriptions which they bore. Within a few years, they have added immeasurably to our knowledge of primeval times and explained in a wonderful manner the brief allusions of the Bible. The oldest existing books are the Hebrew scriptures, which alone of ancient writings describe the preparation of the earth for the abode of man. Okay, and I'm going to pause again. I'm just going to tell you, this would have been a common history textbook at one time. This is what students would have been immersed in. Not that the Bible is myth or fantasy or just crazy stuff. Not that it should be tossed aside and discarded and disregarded. What does he say? That these Hebrew scriptures alone, there's a footnote here. Scattered traditions of the same events have been found in several nations. The most remarkable were in the writings of Berosus, who, to his account of the creation, added that the monstrous living creatures which had floated in the darkness of the primeval ocean perished at the appearance of light. These must have been the pre-Adamite animals. Okay, so seems to be indulging in the idea of a pre-Adam existence or creation, or which geology has made known to us only within the present century. Berosus describes a deluge from which only righteous men were saved. Okay, so here you have this other source speaking about the flood, right? Now, the pre-Adamite animals, we have to take these historians in the context of their day, right? And so he's writing at a time where there became a lot of fascination with fossil records and how do we explain the existence of these creatures that we seem to be finding in the fossil records, and we don't we have explanation for it. We don't need to have some kind of creatures living before Adam was created. It's not necessary. Everything fits nicely into the biblical narrative as it's given to us. Okay. But just like today, my point in these episodes is to try to stress that we're more influenced by wrong history than we care to admit, even if we are adamant about our embracing biblical or creationist or providential view of history. We're more influenced than we realize, and that's part of the reason why I want to go through this exercise. I want to rid myself of those influences and become fully convinced in the history as delivered from the Hebrew scriptures, which alone of ancient writings describe the preparation of the earth for the abode of man. Okay, and so it's not going to be surprising that as we're reading historians from years gone by, that they're going to be influenced by the things that were happening in their lifetime as well, right? So, we don't just flip out about this. We don't read, these must have been the pre-Adamite, oh, well, throw them out. No, just recognize that he has mistakes in his understanding of history, just like we have mistakes in our understanding of history, and maybe together we can work it out. But it would have been nice to me if if you're going to believe that the scriptures alone of ancient writings describe the preparation of the earth, then what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Okay. So Hebrew scriptures, which alone of ancient writings describe the preparation of the earth for the abode of man, his creation and primeval innocence. Okay. Look at how faithful, in spite of whatever else we might do, look at how faithful he is to the actual biblical narrative, right? Man, his creation, his innocence, the entrance of sin into the world, the promise of redemption, the first probation and the almost total destruction of the human race by a flood, the vain attempt of Noah's descendants to avert similar punishment in the future by building a city and tower whose top should reach unto heaven, and their consequent dispersion, the Bible lays the foundation of all subsequent history by sketching the division of the human race into its three great families and describing their earliest migrations. Okay, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three great families. Okay, so again, this would be at one time a standard history textbook, and it has no qualms about. In fact, it insists upon the inclusion of creation, the original innocence of man, the entrance of sin, which it capitalizes here, sin, bad, into the world, the promise of redemption, capitalized, and that can only relate to one thing, one person, right? The flood, which it takes as I would say, just as it's written here, a universal flood, right? Because it's almost the total destruction of the human race. The building of Babel, and this last statement here is strong. This last statement where it says, the Bible lays the foundation of all subsequent history by sketching the division of the human race into its three great families and describing their earliest migrations. Right? And this is what we've been saying, is that now we understand how we get the nations, the people groups, the ethnicities that we have. Its origins are given to us in the Bible. Okay, we're going to have to stop there. We'll pick up with Thalheimer in our next episode, as we're going to see. Okay, so you hear me say, well, we want to do history right. Okay, well, I would suggest that what we're reading here in Thalheimer is somebody who's making a concerted effort to do history right. Okay, he is confident in what he called the Hebrew Scriptures, which alone of ancient writings describe the preparation of the earth for the abode of man. Right, and he goes through all these parts that are precious to us in our Christian faith. But now we see they're not just precious to us in our Christian faith, they're precious to us in terms of properly understanding history. What did he say? The Bible lays the foundation of all subsequent history, right? Imagine if this history book in particular, or history books like this, had been retained in our education system, and so that our children are reading the significance of the place of the Bible in understanding all of life. I mean, yeah. See to it that your children understand the place of the Bible, okay? And the next time your child might say, well, why do we have to read the Bible? And you could say, well, there's many reasons. One of them is that the Bible lays the foundation of all subsequent history. Like, that's why it's important. Right? You want to understand history. You want to know what's been going on in the world over all the centuries. Well, you need to read the Bible, because it will lay the foundation so that you understand all of that much better. All right. We'll need to end there for tonight. I hope this was, for this episode, I should say, I hope this was helpful to you. And we're beginning to see now, right? We've seen a little bit of it before, but even more now, we're beginning to see what it looks like to do history right, as we're starting to read in other sources, not the Bible, which, I mean, it's not a problem to keep reading the Bible, because the Bible does lay the foundation of all subsequent history. But now we're beginning to see what it looks like, what it can look like to do history right. And we're seeing that Thalheimer is a nice example here that we were just reading tonight. And so I hope you'll want to stick with this, with us through this series, that we can It's so refreshing. It's just so refreshing to read um, history textbooks that are intentional about um, acknowledging the place of the Bible in understanding history. Um, the fact that history is about a plan that the Creator has, and and accomplishing that plan through history. So it's I hope you find it refreshing as well. All right, we'll conclude there for tonight and for this episode, and I hope that you're able to join us for future episodes. If you haven't done so, do the whole like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Share the video with others, and leave a comment or two, and correct me where I've made my mistakes. And let's continue exploring what it means for history to be done.